Soyoung-Jeong.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I'm from KMCRIC, Korean Medicine Convergence Research Information Center. Thank you for joining us on this interview.
It's my pleasure.
Well, I understand that you're currently working as a licensed acupuncturist in USA and
That's right.
as well as a successful entrepreneur, right?
That's right. Yes.
For starters, could you tell us about how you stepped into acupuncture research field at first?
Yes. Well, I was an acupuncturist. I've been an acupuncturist since 1999, and I see many patients. Currently, I probably see about maybe 40 patients a week in 2 or 2.5 days in the clinic. But at the time that you're asking about, I was full-time acupuncture clinician. Glenn Langevin's lab is in the same town as where I was practicing in Burlington, Vermont. And I had come to know of her research and found it very interesting. And I'd had her give a talk for our local acupuncture association and things like that. As she developed some devices in order to accomplish her basic science work in the lab, her program officer at the National Institutes of Health suggested that there might be some commercial potential for the instruments that she had developed along with an engineering colleague at the university. So Helene Langevin and David Churchill approached me about starting a company. And when we first started the company, this was in about 2003, and we first called it Meridian Sensors because it was mostly focused on what has now become the AccuSensor device, which was just a way to measure the actually it started as a way to measure the forces involved with needling. So in order to get this kind of a grant, because it's considered like technology transfer or translational in nature to try to get equipment out of the lab and into the clinic. There's a special type of grant that our funding agencies give just to small businesses to commercialize technology. So we formed the company and just in order to do that. So that's how it got started.
So you started making AccuSensor at your company?
Yes. Well, in the very first phase one, we developed a device which now is the force sensor of the AccuSensor. But after the phase one, we realized that we needed to capture motion as well, because you can imagine if you measured there's a high torque here, but did you get a high torque by rotating it 10 degrees or 300 degrees? And we realized that we needed to add motion in as well. So when we did the phase 2 of our project, we developed a motion sensor, so that became the complete AccuSensor. Then some of our subsequent projects became more focused on making measurements using needles and ultrasound to capture forces and motion that occurs during acupuncture needling, but has to do with the tissue itself rather than just the needling. So that's when we decided to broaden our name to Stromatec. Stroma it refers to connective tissue. It's kind of an anatomical word that is like the extracellular matrix, the stroma.
I see.
So that's where the name comes from. And that's when, over time, I started to think of needling I started to think of an acupuncture needle in two different ways. One way is we use an acupuncture needle to deliver a treatment to create change in the body. And the other way that we started to do was to use the needle as a probe to question the body or derive information from the body. So I kind of think of that as kind of the yin and the yang of acupuncture needles, where the yang is where you're delivering a treatment, and the yin is where you're asking a question from the tissue. Does that make sense?
A little bit, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we think of it.
I see. Thank you. Interesting. Oh. So then the company Stromatec,
Yes.
Is it currently just producing OcuSensor? Do you have any plan for developing any more devices?
Yes. So right now we have the acuSensor, and that device is available for sale. It's a research device or a teaching device.
Mm-hmm.
We don't make any clinical claims about it because no one has done research linking needle movement with improved outcomes,
Mm-hmm.
which is what we would need to make a clinical claim that it improves treatment.
Yes.
But we have other devices, and I'll talk about them in my talk today. One is called Stromatorque, and one is called Stromaglide. And these devices are basically where the acuSensor just passively measures what an acupuncturist does.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't control anything, it just records movement and forces that interact between the practitioner and the patient, or if you're using it for basic science, whatever you're doing with it. These other devices, if we're going to query the tissue, we need to standardize the input of the needle. In other words, we need to control the speed that the needle moves. We need to use sensors to detect what's going on. So in that controlled aspect, the Stromatorque controls the rotation of the needle and measures needle torque. The Stromaglide actually uses ultrasound to measure tissue motion, but the movement is induced by a needle in a controlled manner.
Okay.
So that'll become more clear, I think, when you see some of my slides today.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. So those devices we haven't sold to anyone. We're hoping to develop them. Ultimately, we hope that they can be useful as a way to help clinicians measure differences in people's connective tissue, and that they will prove to have a clinical application. Right now, we haven't proven that, so but they're certainly available for other researchers who might want to use them in their own research. Does that make sense?
Yes.
They're available as investigational devices for researchers, but once again, we haven't done the work to have any kind of a clinical claim.
I see.
Yes.
That is very intriguing.
So the second two devices, Stromatorque and Stromaglide, are more in the category of diagnostic devices, whereas the acuSensor is more of a research or a teaching tool to just measure. It's like a measurement tool.
Thank you very much for sharing this story with us. It's
Sure.
very interesting and very informative as well. Thank you for joining this interview. This
You're
will be
welcome.
the end.
Okay.